Let me welcome you all on behalf of Bonard to our fifth webinar of our City Market Webinar series. My name is David Navarro. I'm a Business Development Manager at Bonard, and it will be my pleasure to discuss the student housing market in the Greater Paris region, as well as findings based on Bonard's research. So firstly, we will commence with a market briefing and a presentation which will showcase the key data and trends of the Greater Paris market, including topics such as demand, as well as the current and future supply of student housing within this market. And finishing the presentation, we shall have a panel discussion, and it will be our great pleasure to welcome key market leaders who will help us to better understand the market dynamics and to engage in a fruitful conversation and a discussion. Right. So for those of you unfamiliar with Bonard, we are a market intelligence and strategic development firm, which is specialized in the rented residential asset classes. So a bit of a background, the company was established in 2007, and we have been more than 10 years within the student housing market, 10 years of experience. And over recent years, we've also began researching and understanding other rented residential asset classes, such as build-to-rent, senior living, co-living, and others. We are based in Vienna. We have 2 other European offices, and we have 1 branch in China. At the moment, we are now 91 specialists, and we have done over 600 projects, such as location assessments, consultancies, deliveries, and analysis. We are covering over 250 geographies on the municipality level across Europe, Asia, Australia, Latin America, and Canada as well. So our main goal is to support our clients to leverage our knowledge and experience, as well to support them through their investment processes, through our data and our research. So without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. Let us explore and understand as well in further depth and detail the Greater Paris market. Right, so I would like to kindly welcome you all to this new session of Bonard's webinar series, dedicating our knowledge for the most sought after student housing markets in Europe. So the data and the insights that will be presented to you today are based on Bonard's in-house data and in-field research, as well as conversations with local players. So we have already previously covered Milan, Madrid, Warsaw, and Lisbon, and now we will be talking about the Greater Paris market. So we hope that the following presentation and data will help you have a better understanding of Greater Paris market dynamics and will serve you as a base for the subsequent panel. So let us look firstly at the demand. Right? So from the demand point of view, referring to student population in Greater Paris, we can see that within the 131 communes that have been taken into account for the Greater Paris region, you can see that it is home to 119 universities and schools, of which 11 of them have a global ranking. So we have observed demand as a general trend shows growth over the years. We observe a drop in international students. This is mostly due to travel restrictions during the pandemic. Most recent figures show that the student population has rebounded. So there are approximately 460,000 students in Greater Paris, of which over 385,000 are domestic, making approximately 84% of the total student population. Within the domestic students, we have identified approximately 23% of the total to be domestic mobile, whilst the remaining 75,000 students are international. This makes up around 16% of the total student population. Now, just as an interesting fact, we've seen that the top countries of origin for international students that come to France overall are mainly from Morocco, Algeria, China, Italy, and Senegal. So these are statistics for on a national level for the French market, so for French cities. Now, when talking about supply within this market, there are currently 646 PBSA assets or student residences within the city, and they cumulatively provide 79,755 beds. So the larger portion of the student housing accommodations are the public ones, with 460 of these residences versus the 186 private assets. In terms of beds or capacity, the total 646 residences operate a little under 80,000 beds. And this is cumulatively, the numbers are split between the private and non-private beds, private being 25,000, a little over 25,000 beds, and the non-private is as well a little over 54,000 beds. So we can then see that the private sector constitutes or makes up 32% of the total bed capacity. And further within this 32% of the private sector, the majority of currently operational private stock is covered by the following 7 operators, which is ECLA, Les Belles Années, Les Étudiants, Studavix 20 Campus, and UFirst Campus. Now, from the map, we can see the distribution of private PBSA versus the non-private ones. And this is, again, within the Greater Paris region. Now, in this next slide, talking about the PBSA market structure, it's important to highlight that the Greater Paris PBSA is broken down into various types of assets with different capacities. However, the average bed capacity is higher within the private PBSAs versus the non-private ones. So with 152 beds in private versus 121 in the public stock. Now, the majority of the private assets, 67% of them have in between 100 to 299 beds, 28% of them have less than 50 beds, and the remaining 6% are divided between assets with more than 300 beds. Now, the public sector is almost equally distributed with accommodations with less than 50 beds or between 100 to 299 beds with 49% and 47% respectively. Now, let's talk a little bit about the future of PBSA stock within Greater Paris over the next couple of years. So it is expected that over 16,000 beds will be introduced into the market. These 16,000 beds, 33% are planned to be added by private investors in the next couple of years. This includes brands such as Cardinal Campus, Clay Group, Gessina, and others. Now, a lot of development is coming outside of Paris itself. And this is within the larger Greater Paris region and within suburban communes. Now, regarding the known pipeline for private stock, we know that this has more than 5,300 beds within the pipeline. Now, the largest non-private sector, cruise, with plans to expand the stock by almost 4,000 beds before 2026. Now, apart from this list that you are now seeing on screen, Bonard tracks many other different projects in the pipeline. Now, through our research, then, we can consider that the market is not likely to reach a relative saturation point in the next couple of years, which makes the market a competitive one for new players, but however, it is still possible to enter the market. Now, when talking about rents, based on our collection of data of various room offerings, we can see overall the biggest gap between average rents charged in private versus public accommodation is for single studios of an average of 839 euros versus 525 euros, and single en-suites, which have an average of 845 euros versus 572 euros. Now, we can see that one-bedroom apartments have similar average monthly rents. So this is 1,112 euros on average for the private ones versus 909 euros average for monthly rent in public establishments. Now, single rooms have the lowest average rent difference between private and public stock, and the difference is approximately 169 euros. So if we would benchmark then the private rental market on monthly average rents for single studios, which would include utilities within the rent, we can see that the price is of around 852 euros. Now, just a quick note, the chart shows average monthly rents per room per person, and this is already adjusted to include VAT and utilities, and also excluding meal plans. All right, so as we benchmark or we compare assets, we can see a clear correlation between monthly rents that are being charged with the facilities that are being offered and the capacity related to the assets. So with more facilities available within the assets, the more room for charging a higher rent from operators is possible. So as more players begin entering the market and there is more competition, so emphasis will be placed on providing a wider variety of facilities and amenities, which in return will attract students and increase both occupancy and rents. Now, from the chart that we're now currently seeing, it's important to mention that we are only looking at large private assets. These are the ones that comprise 100 beds and over, and the majority of residences, which is the bulk within the graph itself. Now, the market is quite developed in terms of product offering, as we can see, and as well the results from our research has proven. Now, for the greater Paris market, the large-scale private establishments mainly feature communal kitchens, cinema rooms, multifunctional social areas, gyms and laundry facilities, bike storages, and parking facilities. So these are the main amenities that are on offer. All right, so now this next slide will give us a benchmark for other popular cities within France, which we thought would be a good comparison point when it comes to student population. So for PBSA beds as a total and offered by private operators, for provision rate as well, so as key indicators. Now we can see that the greater Paris has the highest student population compared to Toulouse, Bordeaux, and Nantes, and 16% of international students, and total PBSA beds, 32% of these are of the private sector. Now, Bordeaux is the city with the highest share of private beds, which is 45%, and it also has the lowest provision rate. Now, for the greater Paris, we can see that the provision rate is around 17.3%. But during the last year, Greater Paris was one of the markets actually with the highest number of PBSA assets, opened in 2022. So this is around 8 assets and 1,700 beds. So an interesting fact is that even though provision rate is higher than other cities in continental Europe, occupancy rate for France overall is around 96%, which is indicative of the healthy demand for this product. So this we have been able to collect by being in touch with operators at individual residences. We have had conversations with PBSA owners. We've done mystery shopping and visits to the individual assets to find out current occupancies, as well as to have tenant breakdowns and preferences towards certain room types. All right, so as we have basically previously covered in the presentation, Greater Paris constitutes an interesting and strong market for PBSAs. It is as well the market with the highest number of students and PBSA beds from the other markets that we have previously covered in our webinars with Madrid, Warsaw, Milan, and Lisbon. And we hope that you have found value in the data and the research presented. And now it is with great pleasure that we will jump to our awaited panel discussion with key market leaders, and we will engage in a fruitful conversation for the Greater Paris market. All right, so good morning, gentlemen. I would like to thank you once again for joining our panel discussion. So I would leave the floor for you to introduce yourselves.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Roman.
Hello, so I'm Roman Venturi. I work as an investment manager at Axco Group. Axco Group is Brookfield's French platform dedicated to managed real estate. We are an integrated company investing in developing and operating managed residences. Our in-house real estate developer Oceanis has 25 years experience in the sector with 12,000 units delivered to date. We also operate 100 apart hotels in France under the brand Apart City. And finally, we are investors operators of PBSA and co-living residences with a portfolio of 60 residences, both in Greater Paris and in 25 other cities in France. So that's who we are. Focusing more on PBSA, we offer two different products through our brands Axco and Eclat. So Axco are PBSA residences of around on average 150 beds scattered across France, and Eclat are large residences, co-living residences of on average 1,000 beds each, and that's a whole different product with lots of amenities such as cinemas, restaurants, gyms, e-sport rooms, music rooms, many amenities. So that's a summary of who we are, and I'm really happy to join this panel with you guys.
Perfect, Roman. Thank you very much for the introduction. We're very happy to have you here as well. Joe, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe, Head of Residential and Student at AXA IM. In terms of our PBSA holdings, we have around €3.5 billion globally, so across Europe, America, Japan, and Australia, which is around 24,000 beds, 61 assets in 8 countries. Specifically on France, we currently have around or just over 5,000 operational beds, with another 5,000 or so in development or in various stages of construction. We acquired the Clay Group back in 2019, which has been subsequently rebranded to the Boost Society. Clay forms our student arm, but we also have, like Romain, we have a co-living piece, which is branded Hive. And we are continuing to expand and really like the market, and looking to do more in this space. So looking forward to a good discussion also.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you on board as well. And then finally, last but not least, Yuri, you would care to introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yuri, and I'm head of rental residential at Bonnard. Actually, David has already introduced our company, so I'll be short. We're an advisory and a research firm, which is focused on the studies of the alternative asset classes, such as student housing, build-to-rent, co-living, senior housing, and others. And we deliver data and insights to support the strategic decision-making of investors, developers, operators, funds, and also governments. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Yuri. All right, so gentlemen, let's get to the panel discussion. So I would like to pose a general question to open it. So would like to ask, and I think many of the attendees today are wondering, what makes Greater Paris and France attractive locations for PBSA developers and operators? So perhaps we could start with Joe.
Why is Greater Paris attractive? I think one of the key drivers for us entering into the market, other than obviously AXA being French, and it would be rude not to be in our home market, but I think what's attracted us, or one of the big attractions, is the barriers to entry. France is very particular, very difficult to enter if you're not familiar with the country or based in the country and have boots on the ground. When you compare that to other countries such as maybe Spain, for example, which are a lot easier to enter. So barriers to entry were key. I think being pretty much the largest student market in Europe is also a big tick in the box as a first step into any new country. And I suppose that the biggest thing that we look at is obviously the types of accommodation. So albeit that the provision rates can probably scare a few people off, you need to account for the number of cruise beds, which are a very different product, very different price point, very different offering. And I think from our perspective, offering a choice to students, which we've got experience of in other countries, is beneficial. The type of product that we offer and Romain offers is very different and appeals to a different type of customer base. So when you look at the broader picture in terms of France and Paris in particular, you couple the barriers to entry, needing to have people on the ground, offering the option and choice to students, the size of the universities, the strength of the universities, when you've got 4 in the top 100 QS rankings, for example, in the Paris region, all make that a very attractive proposition for any investor or developer to seriously consider.
Thank you, Joe. Romain, would you care to add anything?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Joe said about the cruise offering. So that's the public type of PPSA, quite basic in its product, and we believe there's a lot of room for better products. That's what we are offering together with Clay and other players in the industry. One specific thing that you have also to bear in mind is that besides the 400,000 international students that come every year to our country and who are natural clients for our residencies, mainly in bigger cities, there's also a long-term trend in the habits of French students. As more, 2/3 of them already live outside of their hometown, away from their parents' home, and they need accommodation. So that's a lot. That's a huge share of them, and 76% of them are willing to join and live in the PBSA, in private PBSA. So we believe there's a lot of room. That's what we experience also with all our latest openings that are filling up really rapidly. And also, if we want to focus on the specifics of France as a market for PBSA, there is also the importance of state incentives, because they are also modeling they are also having an impact on the market, both because you have housing allowances handed out to students regardless of their nationality, up to more than 200 euros per month, which is quite significant, and can help towards paying the rent. There's also the fact that the market has been structured around individual investors in the past. So basically, you had developers building PBSA and then selling it off to individual retail investors that could benefit from tax incentives, and that really structured the market with individual ownership of units and operators operating on a lease, on an asset-light basis only. So if you want to invest in the French market, there are not a lot of opportunities with existing assets. You basically have to develop your own assets. And that's a specific thing I wanted to mention because, it could be different from other countries.
Thank you very much for the very valuable insights, gentlemen. This is very good to sort of kick off and to understand a little bit more the market dynamics and similar. So let's talk a little bit more about city specifics. Yuri, do you think there are any specifics compared to other markets concerning new PBSA developments in Greater Paris?
Actually, what we observe in the Greater Paris area in terms of allocation of the new PBSA schemes is relevant for a lot of other big cities in the EU. I mean the gravitation of the newly developed student residences closer to more remote districts and farther from city downtowns, although not far away from the key students' hubs. I'd say maximum 30 minutes travel by public transport, which is crucial for the majority of students. Yeah, and I know that currently probably there are more than 16 new PBSA schemes, which are being built or planned in Greater Paris. And we see that more than 70% of them will be located in the municipalities outside of the city of Paris. Yes, as I said, it's a common trend in the big cities, especially in the capital ones, due to the several reasons. First of all, it's quite difficult to find free buildable land plots closer to the central area of the city. And also, I would say that there is a certain lack of convertible buildings, and even if some proper building is found, sometimes it's too cumbersome to get permission to convert it and to do refurbishment or adjustments to layouts. So in short, the zoning, building plans, and strict requirements for the new developments make it very difficult to develop PBSA in the central area. Yeah, indeed, the cost of land plots usually is very high, impacting the feasibility of the PBSA project. It's obvious. As an example, recent openings in Paris were introduced in a remote area, although not far away from universities and colleges. For sure, 100% the location is the key. However, it's becoming more and more difficult to find a proper one in Greater Paris. This is my take on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuri. So obviously location then plays a key role in the city, no matter how big or small. But when we talk about a metropolis such as Paris, what criteria or factors do you take into consideration when choosing the optimal location? So perhaps, Joe, we could get your insights.
Sure. Very simplistically, Paris isn't that different to other gateway cities in terms of what are you looking for when you're looking to develop or acquire PBSA. You know, micro-location, strength of the colleges, universities, the availability of residential product, because that's what you're competing with in the local market. They're all factors that you take into account for most cities. But I think one of the key things that we and the Clay team carry out on our behalf is the market tension within each arrondissement. So we're looking at what's the rental offering on the residential side, what's the price point, the availability, how stressed is that market, which underpins our confidence of developing a PBSA scheme and being able to position the rents accordingly. I think a major factor is that Paris is very stretched in terms of a residential offering for tenants. It's the demand supply dynamics are clear for everyone to see, that it's very difficult to find somewhere, and pricing is increasing rapidly and has increased rapidly over a number of years. I think the introduction of the Grand Paris plan has really helped to open up new areas that can now become accessible, because it's quite misleading when you look at the numbers for Paris in particular, but France in general. The way the education system is made up is it's got universities, but it's also got Grande École, which don't often get counted in the statistics. So therefore, you're missing out on a huge chunk of very strong institutions with strong student bases, which are in areas across Paris that you potentially wouldn't be looking at. So with the accessibility through the Grand Paris extensions, looking at these types of colleges and the strength of the courses that they're offering, as well as the strategy of the colleges and universities, we've seen a lot of growth in terms of new campuses coming online or about to come online in the near future. And again, this all helps to dictate or to help to assess where you potentially will be looking to invest.
I totally agree with what you said. Just to add something, there's such a shortage of accommodation in inner Paris that people and students are looking outside city limits to get accommodation, especially foreign students who are willing to get a bit further away, if it means having a simpler onboarding within the residence. So that's what we saw in the recently. We opened a residence in Eastern Paris area, so outside of the city limits in Noisy-le-Grand. It's a big residence of more than 1,000 beds, and it filled up really rapidly within 2 months, mostly with foreign students, because of the ease of getting to Paris. So I would say one key point is being close to public transport, even if it's far from the city center, and it works, and it's been working every time in the past. And what you said about Grande École is perfectly true. I have to agree on that. You have some Grande École, for instance, as far as Cergy, so ESSEC, for instance, one of the most prestigious business schools in France, is located in Cergy, Pontoise. It's more than 30 kilometers away from the city center. And you have other examples like that around Paris. So you also have to take that into consideration.
Great, thank you very much, gentlemen. Now, let's talk a little bit more about demand, right? So whenever we're talking about demand for student housing, international students play a very big role, I would say. Now, Bonnard's International Education Division is monitoring student movements and as well key source markets for educators in different countries. Now, Yuri, could you please talk about which countries of origin are playing a key role in the French education sector, and about the movement of domestic students within the country?
Sure, thanks, David. Well, domestic students remain the core of the demand for student housing in Paris. As was shown on one of the slides, the share of domestic students stands around 85%. So hence the share of international students equals some 15%. And I would say that the share of international students fluctuated widely, especially during COVID times, when the share of international students declined very steeply due to the limited visa for internationals. But now we see that the share of international students becomes stable, and I think it's worthwhile to expect more or less a stable ratio between these domestic and international students in the future. When it comes to the origin of international students in Greater Paris, they are mainly from North Africa, Algeria, Morocco, and we see that there are a lot of students coming from China and Italy. I don't know the specific percentages of these countries, but I believe they occupy a big share of the total student population in Greater Paris. Also, it's interesting that there is a significant growth in the number of students from Italy and Spain. I think this trend is caused particularly by the new scholarship program, France Excellence Europe. So it's devoted to encouraging European students to choose France for master's level studies. And it proved to be rather fruitful in terms of attracting international students to France, particularly to Greater Paris area. When it comes to the domestic mobility, I think that 2/3 of students are originally outside of Greater Paris area, so it underpins a huge demand for student housing in this area, because all of them need some accommodation to stay in.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Yuri. Now, Romo, we know that student housing assets maintain relatively high occupancy rates compared to other asset classes and markets during the COVID-19 pandemic, due in part to many international students that have opted not to travel back home and stay in the country. So how has this transitioned into the post-COVID-19 situation? Would you say that occupancies are back to pre-pandemic levels? Have they grown? Are they lower?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that the short answer is yes. we are back to pre-pandemic levels. Actually, this asset class demonstrated its resilience during COVID with a low impact, especially during the first wave, where we saw barely any. I mean, people basically stayed in their apartments. On the following waves, it was a little bit. There was a little bit more of an impact as some schools moved to a full online mode of teaching, but it remained really really limited, and occupancy rates remained really high. Today our residences are full again. We recently launched 2 large residences of more than 1,000 beds each, which filled up really rapidly within 2 months. An extra positive sign was that one of those 2 opened in January, which is unusual as we tend to open in September, and still reached 90% occupancy by the end of February. So it's another confirmation of the depth and the potential of the PBSA market in Greater Paris. And to answer your question more specifically, international students actually came back in bigger number after COVID than before. We have now passed the bar of 400,000 international students coming to the country, and you know, basically on our bigger residences, they represent 80% of our clients in Greater Paris. So yeah. Yeah, that's what we observed.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we've seen something very similar to what Roman was saying there in terms of the return of students post-pandemic. The occupancy levels are very strong again. In fact, the Île-de-France region returned stronger than the regions outside of Paris. So again, testament to the strength of the education sector there as well, and obviously the willingness for people to want to study there. I think internationals, the numbers that you quoted, Yuri, were spot on. You know, we've traditionally seen 85% domestic, 15% internationals as an average across our portfolio. Don't expect it to jump massively, whilst we're cognizant that student numbers have grown probably 3% on average since 2016, and actually over the last sort of 3 years they've grown 5%. So the strength is there. There's a lot more people that are domestics that are mobile and traveling into Paris. I think in recognition of the strength of the quality of education, and also the ease of moving around with the Grand Prix, like I said before. So whilst there's still a bit of work to do in terms of if the target is to attract even more internationals, there's a lot of work to do still on the English talk courses. I think that's where a lot of other countries have benefited, such as Germany and the Netherlands, for example, which offer a huge number of courses which are increasing, and even Italy, which is probably the least mature market in Europe, is growing the number of English talk courses there as well. So Paris has still got a way to go, but nevertheless, it's still very, very attractive, and to have a strong domestic market really helps in terms of underpinning your investments, because we don't want to rely 100% on internationals, obviously.
Yeah. On what you said about the English taught courses is interesting, because historically they have been almost non-existent, and we've seen an increase in the offering, and we're starting to see that reflected in the profile of our residents. In the past, we mostly had people coming from French-speaking countries such as Morocco or other African countries. In our residencies that we have around Paris, we have lots of Indian people recently arriving, as well as Chinese, and I think this is also thanks to the increase in English courses.
It's a very interesting insight. It's good to see, and it was good as well that it was mentioned that indeed student housing is of a counter-cyclical nature. It's very resilient, and it's as well. It's interesting to see that there are many different approaches and different factors that are being considered or implemented in order to increase the sort of the footprint of this sector, right? So let's move on to talk a little bit more about the product itself, right? So Yuri, based on Bonnard's data, do you see any trends in the size of the products, the amenities that are offered, perhaps other elements in the projects that have been opened in recent years?
Well, we're witnessing changes in PBSA products, not only in Greater Paris area, but also in other markets, which is a consequence of strengthening of competition and also seeking higher returns on investment, as well as tailoring PBSA products by developers toward the expectations of institutional investors. We definitely see an increase in the size of the PBSA scheme in Paris. All developers and investors of newly built private PBSA are looking for the scale, and now it's a very rare case when a new privately run developments accommodate less than 200 beds per scheme. So also these bigger PBSA are the sort of response to the growing demand in Paris for student housing. Recently, we did an interesting exercise to measure how the size of PBSA schemes evolved over the recent decade in Paris, and I can share the results. So we identified that private properties older than 10 years now have around 120 units on average. And when it comes to the PBSA established from 5 to 2 years ago, their size got bigger. So on average, they have around 150 beds. And the most recent openings in Paris, aged less than 5 years, they accommodate 250 beds on average. So we even see schemes with more than 800 beds. So in short, the size of the schemes has almost doubled over the last 10 years in Paris because of the scale, which is needed to achieve a reasonable return on investments. Yes, as I said, this is a common trend around European markets, not only in Paris. Maybe a couple of words regarding quality of the product. When it comes to the services and amenities, strengthening all the competition on the PBSA market in Paris. But just to remind you that the provision rate soon will climb to 20% in the city and aim to achieve higher rents. All these push developers and investors to establish top-notch product with rich amenities and services on site. Again, if we take a look at older PBSA product in Paris, they have up to 5 amenities on site, very basic. But when it comes to the newer PBSA, especially recently opened, all they have hotel-type facilities, much more and of higher quality than older establishments. If we take recent openings in Paris, which are operated by prominent operators, and everyone is impressed by the quality and the number of facilities. So all of them have gym, multifunctional rooms, restaurants, cafe. So in short, all those facilities which contribute to the building and strengthening of community. So it's one of the most valuable features of PBSA in the eye of students. Yeah, and it's rather complicated, I would say, for older PBSA to keep up with this trend, just because it's often not possible to make a proper renovation of the old buildings. Yeah, this is how I see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Yuri. So, Roman, from your point of view, how do you compare the evolution of the assets and which amenities are perhaps more common or important for tenants, other than obviously Wi-Fi? Are there any other essential ones?
Well, some of our oldest assets just had an entry hall, a laundry room, and mailboxes. Now we've added Wi-Fi to the list as the essentials, the bare essentials. But on all our new products, we also include a gym, a community kitchen, a study room, a bike garage as well. So those are starting to be fairly common across the new residences. Even standard ones. But there's also the, something that works really well is a more prime offering that we sell under the brand Eclat. And for those residences, we offer things like it's an all-inclusive offer with utilities included, with hassle-free experience. So you just come in with your suitcases and the flat is for you. Everything is sorted out. You have available staff to assist you, access to a co-working area, private cinemas that you can book for you and your friends. You have music studios with music equipment. You have sometimes you can have spa areas, yoga rooms, DIY workshops, restaurants, housekeeping, and breakfast as additional services. And all of these services included in one residence creates a need for critical size. That's why we've been increasing the size of our residences, especially the Eclat residences. Now we have 3 residences, more than 1,000 beds each across in the Paris area, and that's really needed if you want to keep these services profitable. So on smaller residences, more standard residences, as you mentioned, the average moved from 150 to 250, and it's also what we experience in our own portfolio. We are looking at a little bit bigger assets now to absorb larger common areas.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, David. I won't repeat what Romain and Yuri said. They've pretty much named most of the amenities that you offer. But what I would say is that, touching on the point that Yuri said about scale is extremely important. If you want to offer these amenities, you need a decent sized building. I haven't quite got the nerve to do the 1,000 beds that Romain does, but he's giving me more and more confidence every time he speaks, which is great. But the size is key, and it's been very difficult actually to find plots to at scale. You can find lots of smaller sub 100 bed buildings, but from an operational perspective, they just don't really work. So in terms of the offering, apart from what I would call a core offering, study spaces are absolutely key. Students love those, and they're always full and used and very well appreciated. But I think, touching on what I said before about opening up around Greater Paris and on the edges of the second ring, etc., where you've got these specialist colleges and schools, you also need to, I think, be mindful of the type of student that will be staying with you, and reflect that in the amenity offering. So for instance, if you're close to a fashion arts college, then the space that you're offering there would be different to perhaps an engineering college or a law school. So as well as offering the core facilities, I think you need to be cognizant and attuned to the demographic of student that you'll be housing and what their particular needs may well be.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's very interesting to see then the evolution of the PBSAs in terms of the services, amenities, and facilities on offer. So let's talk now maybe a bit about affordability. So basically, how has inflation impacted tenant affordability? Are tenants willing to pay more or less for services and amenities? If I could get Joe and Romain's opinions.
Do you want me to start, Romain, or do you want to?
Yeah, please.
I thought you might say that. So are they willing to pay more? I think France, Paris, as with a lot of nascent European countries, has had to go through an education process in terms of understanding what PBSA is versus and the differences to the residential market, and why perhaps there is a premium for PBSA. And for us who have been in the business for a while, it's obvious. You can see the product differences, the services, amenities, the operational side of things, security, safety, etc. That all is very different to what you would get in the open residential market, and that comes at a cost. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant that this is not a huge market that's based purely on international students who, in the past, as we've seen in other countries, are prepared to pay a lot more for that safety and security and the newer type of product. We need to be mindful of that. Saying that though, Roman touched on it before, where you've got things like the AFL, where you've got the subsidies for students, 200 euros goes a long way. And actually, if you take that off the averages that you were showing before, David, suddenly that looks extremely affordable. Now, we need to be careful, and certainly from our perspective, we need to be careful about the rent increases that we're pushing through. We're fortunate that in France, you're not seeing the huge spike in utilities costs that you're seeing elsewhere, just based on government initiatives. So therefore, we need to be mindful, and it is very much on an asset by asset basis as to what you can push through, and what is and based on the profile of the students, and what you're effectively able to put onto those rents. But I don't think Roman or I would ever underwrite 10% growth year on year. Perhaps I'm wrong and Roman does, but you just wouldn't be that naive to do that. So you've got to be mindful. Yes, you've got to respect what's happening in the marketplace. Inflation is high almost everywhere, and but you need to make sure that you're getting that balance right. So there is no silver bullet. It is very much case by case, asset by asset basis. But at the same time, we need to pass on some of that cost as well, as much as possible.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, rents are indexed with a national index published by the government. So, in place rents are leases are increasing that way, and that partially offset inflation. For new leases that we sign with new residents, we are able to increase a little bit the rent. Apart from that, I would say that I totally agree with you on the profile of residents. If you are, in an area, mostly in bigger cities, on a product that can leverage on maybe on a more premium offering, you can maybe value a little bit more those services. Whereas if you are offering a bare bones type of offer in a secondary city, it might be a bit more difficult to increase the rent, because you're going to face students that are coming from a lower income background. But in France, you also have the cruise offering that also fills this role with the with many beds offered to lower income students. And so if you can differentiate your product a little bit and offer something that's just a bit more than simple housing, you can probably value those services. That's what we observed, and yeah, so far it's a bit early to draw conclusions on inflation, but that's what we observed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So one of the next points we would like to address would be regarding transactions. So, we've seen many transactions in Paris for recent years. Which ones would you consider the most significant ones? I mean, we know that Joe would have a few in mind, but we would like to get your insights first.
Thanks, David. Well, if we are talking about transactions of PBSA properties located in the greater Paris area, actually, we haven't seen a lot of them in the recent years. Well, this is a sign the market has been cooling down. And if I remember correctly, there are around 20 portfolios in the country, which include properties in Paris. But in recent years, there have been just up to 5 acquisitions. Probably one of the biggest was the acquisition of portfolio done by Brookfield. Also, Catella was active during this period with acquisition of the construction project in the Paris area. Yeah, and also it's known AXA was active and acquired the future PBSA, but perhaps I'm not the best person to comment on this because we have Joe and Romain here who were involved in some of the transactions. So probably Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Yuri. Yes, obviously the Clay acquisition from our perspective was quite sizable, but obviously Brookfield entering the market has also helped to establish it. And you know, certainly from my perspective, we welcome, or our perspective, we welcome more competition because that helps to educate the significant people in the market that potentially don't understand the product. So more institutional players that enter can only help, not just to meet the supply demand imbalance, but also to educate the local mayories and councils, etc., who potentially don't understand PBSA that well. You haven't seen perhaps as much activity as you would have thought, just because of one of the points I raised earlier in terms of the availability of finding land that you can build at scale to make it work. You may remember that a couple of years back, the government introduced a scheme to convert offices to residential, to fast track the planning effectively on that and potentially get additional build volume of, I think, around 20%. Roman, correct me if I'm wrong, which in principle seems like a great idea. You can use, you know, secondary location offices, which potentially work very well for student or co-living. But you know, we've seen a number of these types of opportunities come across the Clay desk, and it's not as easy as it's an office, we can convert it. You know, it's quite particular in terms of extracting the most amount of usable floor area from these buildings is key. And so the shape and, you know, the depth, the width, etc., of these schemes is really important. The number of cores, stairs, etc., it all plays a factor. So therefore, actually, quite a low number of offices that we've seen that potentially could be converted just don't make sense and don't add up. So whilst it was a great initiative, perhaps it's not had as much of an effect as it could have done. But also, like I mentioned before, with the Grand Paris extension, that's certainly opening up new areas, and you can see what Eclat have done at Noisy there. It's, you know, it's a great scheme and it's working very well. So we expect to see some more of that coming through as more and more of the extension opens up over the next couple of years.
Yeah, converting of offices is we are seeing opportunities, more and more opportunities on that front. It's not an easy. It's not easy. It's really not easy. We managed to do that in Noisy-le-Grand, with a large. So yeah, usually what you find is that those assets are larger than you know, standard basic residences, and yeah, it's not easy to convert them because you have sometimes, you know, for offices you have really deep floors, and for residential, especially in France, you need to have a window, for instance, in every living room. So be it a bedroom, or kitchen or anything, you need access to natural light and air as well. So you have to make use of those spaces in a smart way, and that's not always possible. So that limits the you know, the project that could work. So I totally agree with you.
All right. Well, being weary of the time, I think it would be firstly good to thank you gentlemen for the panel today. I would say that definitely there were some very valuable insights shared, very interesting conversation. I'm sure all of our attendees and even us present have learned quite a lot about the Paris market. So I would like to thank you And I would also like to thank all of our attendees for today. Thank you for the time and for being able to join this this webinar. We're looking forward to being in contact with you all, and also we will be sharing the recording and the deck with you once everything is prepared. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, gentlemen, for the panel discussion. Have a great day.
Merci.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bonne journée.